Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. And today we'll be looking at the art of communication or connection or whatever you want to call it. And it's largely going to be about humor. We're going to be looking at some of the quirks, nuances, and strategies of modern communication, including humor. It's one of the it's one of those almost self-help sort of episodes. So today we're exploring the surprisingly rich world of puns, sarcasm, and wit, focusing on the phrase "no pun intended." That annoying thing that people sometimes say when it seems obvious that they were actually intending a pun. Well, we're going to explore that a little bit and what it tells us about human interaction, and along the way, we'll touch on how to refine your humor, not mine. Mine doesn't need any touching up. It's fine the way it is. But you need the help, right? And how to avoid missteps and communicate with clarity while keeping it engaging. Well, okay, I'm definitely the type of person to screw up while talking, and I can barely even remember anybody's names. I'm just bad with names. I don't know. It's amazing I can even recognize my own name. But anyway, let's get started. So this would be segment one. Why do we say no pun intended? It's a phrase that pops up in everyday conversation, social media, even professional settings. But why do people say no pun intended when it's often clear they've noticed the pun after saying it? Is it just for laughs, or is there something deeper at play? So, here are some key reasons. I've actually done a little bit of serious research into this. And one of the reasons is that they're acknowledging unintentional wordplay. It's sometimes a fact that a pun sneaks into our language without premeditation. By saying no pun intended, we signal we've caught the wordplay but didn't mean to distract from the main point. So that's sort of the more, I guess, on the face aspect of that saying. It's sort of the entry level, no ulterior motive dimension of it. But there's also the fact that it can be for a humorous effect. It can be a knee slapper. I don't know if you heard me slapping my knee, but that's what I just did. So, ironically, saying no pun intended can make the pun stand out, often emphasizing its humor. I don't think it typically works, but that's what people try to do. It's like saying, okay, this is funny, whether I meant it or not. And it's a way of sort of like nudging you into like seeing the humor in it, even if you didn't find it funny. It's sort of like nagging at you, saying, this was funny, damn it. This was supposed to be funny. You're supposed to laugh or at least smile or give me something that indicates that I'm actually a funny person. And it can come off as desperate. So, you know, there's that part of it. There's also, politeness or professionalism. In serious contexts, puns might seem out of place. Acknowledging them helps maintain focus while clarifying that humor wasn't the goal. So that's similar to, the first thing I mentioned, although technically a little bit different because, I'm emphasizing how it's a professional setting. You're not supposed to have humor in professional settings or at serious events like, protests or funerals or things like that. Although I once got in trouble because I attended a local protest in 2020. It was the local small town BLM protest, and I had brought little mini donuts along with me, and I called them cop distractors. And the joke was that if there were some cops who were going to actually come out and bust our heads, I'd throw the donuts at them, and they'd be a source of distraction. But fortunately, there wasn't anything like that happened at the event. Everyone was fine. The worst thing that happened was there were some people speeding by angrily, riled up by the protesters who were present. And, some people thought, though, that my tone was wrong and, that you shouldn't be applying humor to a serious situation and yada, yada, yada. And, I kind of get that, but at the same time, I think tone policing is kind of stupid at the end of the day in a lot of cases because you should really just be leading by example more than anything else. Nobody really, I don't want to exaggerate it, nobody got that finger wave or finger waggy at me or whatever. But I could tell that some people were like, um, they just didn't like it. And interestingly, though, some people did. They got the humor and they appreciated it. So it's another one of those things where there were multiple ways of interpreting things, and in my opinion, if you can't have humor, then what can you have? So there's also the rhetorical habit. For some, it's just a conversational quirk, a way to add personality or self awareness to their speech by saying, no pun intended. It's almost like a knee jerk response. I've heard people say that where I don't even necessarily think they said a pun. And you've probably heard that too. It's sort of an expression. And of course, there is the implied cleverness. By pointing out the pun, speakers subtly highlight their awareness of language's nuances, and it might make them seem more highbrow too. So that's another reason why people do it, because they want to seem like they're self-aware, and they they know that there is a lot of unintentional humor that's going on, and they kind of want to seem like they're sophisticated enough to understand that. So, is it easier to rephrase or to just not say it? Often, yes, I think it is. But the phrase "no pun intended" has become its own stylistic tool. It's less about avoiding wordplay and more about how we frame it. So I'm not trying to say, stop saying this altogether, but maybe consider cutting down on it. Treat it like it's sort of the overdone thing that it kind of is. So yeah, that's that's my little spiel on that. So moving on to segment two, looking at my notes, the balance between sarcasm and sincerity. I think this is relevant to what we were just talking about. So let's shift gears to sarcasm. Many of us use it daily, but what happens when people start missing the joke? Or when we rely on it so heavily that our sincerity gets lost? Or, we just end up seeming like a-holes because we're sarcastic all the time. I've known people who, they just seem sarcastic all the time, and it can just get a little annoying. And maybe I come off that way for some people as well. I don't know really, but some people lay it on a little bit too thick, and they end up seeming like they're not sincere about anything, and that can be a little bit of a problem. So if you're aiming to dial it back, here are some practical tips. Again, I've looked this stuff up. I've consulted the oracle that is Google. So one thing is to understand your motives, reflect on why you lean on sarcasm. Is it humor, deflection, a way to connect, a way to just be a bit of a jerk in your everyday conversations? Understanding your intent helps refine your approach. And you might want to try practicing directness. Sometimes it's better to express yourself plainly. For example, if you're sarcastic, you'll say, "Oh, sure, I just love doing everyone's job for them." And then people will hate your they'll just hate you. I'll just put it like that. And they might have a boiling rage against you even if you're constantly saying things like that. But if you want to be direct, just say, "This is frustrating, but I'll get it done." You know, it might not even be as effective, but you might have fewer people who are outright angry at you. So you might want to consider the more direct approach. Sometimes it's really better than, trying to pretend you're some great humorist or something like that. Although maybe you are. I don't know. Who am I to judge? Be mindful of your audience too, of course. Not everyone appreciates sarcasm equally. With close friends, it might land well, but in professional settings, clarity often works better, and it is probably less likely to get you fired. If you're constantly taking a sarcastic tone, they might think you're arguing with them even when you're not trying to, because there's a thin line between sarcasm and being angry, I think, because sarcasm kind of uh, signifies a little bit of anger, I think. So you also should balance with empathy. Wit is sharp, but it shouldn't alienate, or shouldn't always be used to cut people. Humor is a weapon, but sometimes you might want to put away that funny little switchblade. Self-deprecating humor is also a great way to keep things light without risking offense. That's often underrated these days. I think I spend too much time like going after people and not self-deprecating in my applications of humor. But at the same time, if you're too self-deprecating, people also won't take you seriously, or they'll start thinking you're depressed. So you don't want to overdo things that way too much either. So sarcasm can be an art form, but it's most effective when used intentionally and sparingly. You know, or if you are going to lay it on thick, well, then I suppose make a show out of it. If you're going to go all in, then go all in. But, expect some possible negative consequences if you're going to do that. That's all I'm saying. All right, so moving on to segment three, this is about sharpening your wit, which I just basically talked about. Wit and wordplay go hand in hand, and improving these skills can make your communication more engaging, whether you're cracking jokes at a party or writing a clever tweet, or I suppose they don't call them tweets anymore. What would they be? Excretions. The elongated muskrat is making excretions. But anyway, here are some strategies to level up. So expand your knowledge base. Like if you really want to be, a genuinely great humorist, you might even want to read broadly. Satire, literature, and news are potential treasure troves of ideas. And it's not like you're guaranteed to get smarter by looking at the news or or whatever, especially nowadays because it's called infotainment for a reason. It's not necessarily even meant to inform you or let you know what is exactly going on. And there's always been a propaganda aspect to the news, so you got to be careful there. But if you truly balance things out, look at multiple sources, dig deeper, apply a philosophical approach to the news, and really just apply a lot of common sense to it. I know they say there's nothing more in common than common sense, but still, you got to strive to do that. But it really can help you expand your knowledge base and be more humorous in a successful way. So learn about puns, idioms, and figures of speech. Like if you're really wanting to storm the globe as a humorist, or uh, just to impress people at work, or maybe there's somebody you got a crush on. Well, it's not going to hurt to expand your ability to apply, these puns or idioms and whatnot, because it's a way to possibly impress people. And sure, it can be frustrating, as I just mentioned. People might be annoyed by it, but some people, they're gonna maybe fall in love with it. So it's one of those things that depends on how you do it. And of course, you need to practice observational skills if you're looking to improve both your communication and your humor. Look for contradictions or ironies in everyday situations, or of course in the news or things you've read or heard people say. And there are contradictions all over the place. They abound. So you're not gonna struggle when it comes to finding those. But again, the success really depends on the situation, and there are definitely ways to misapply this. And there's a time and a place for everything, like they say. And you also want to notice social dynamics. Wit often comes from seeing what others overlook, and that's a key part of what makes somebody witty versus what makes somebody shitty. You know, they they will be able to observe something that other eyes have missed. And of course, you want to develop verbal dexterity, play word association games to improve quick learning and thinking. So, one of the tactics that people apply when they're studying up for a spelling bee, and in school, is they study the origins of words and things like that. And when I was doing the spelling bee in my career as a spelling bee almost champion, well, no, not almost champion, but I almost made it to Washington D.C. in the 8th grade. I was one competitor away, but one of the tactics that I know other people were doing more than I was they were doing these word associations and looking into the origins of the words, and studying the phonetics of it, because when you're trying to spell words like Sizgi, it's pretty easy to get tripped up. You have to be able to visualize the words sometimes, because some people are visual learners. So, if you want to sharpen your skills as a wordsmith, that's really one way to do it. That's why some people they do gain skills with language if they do crosswords and things like that. And of course, another way is to just write. If you're writing on a regular basis and using a dictionary or a thesaurus, or you know some equivalent to that, looking things up on Wikipedia, or just any old academic research tool, like a study of the history of some object around the house or something like that, you can learn a lot of different unique things. A lot of trivia can also not only score you points at a trivia night at some bar or something like that, but you're probably just going to become smarter, and you're going to learn more about how the world works and how one thing connects to another, and etc., etc. And you might even learn more about the philosophy of language, and you know the unique word origin stuff that I mentioned earlier. Very good idea to get into that. And of course, you can try improv classes to master timing and delivery if you're into that, like if you want to be a comedian of some type. Now, I think improv classes have sort of a bad rap, but it seems fine. Like I don't know. I'm sure some people are actually quite funny who do that. There's the Upright Citizens Brigade. They at least had some funny shows, and I would use them as one of the top examples. There was a great sketch comedy show that was on in the 1990s, pretty crazy, called simply Upright Citizens Brigade. I recommend you check that out if you want to see some messed up sketch comedy. And I think part of the mastery of that show was simply that they made a lot of sort of obscure cultural references, and they blended them all together, and it was still original. You can't really say that they were ripping people off left and right, because it was a very original sketch comedy show. And really, if you're doing that, if you're doing that type of research, and you're learning how to improvise, think fast on your feet, you're going to be funny, and you're going to be smarter. And of course, learn from the greats. Follow witty figures like Tina Fey, Oscar Wilde, or Stephen Fry. George Carlin was a bit of a wordsmith, even though he kind of had a reputation toward the end as being a bitter old man comic, and that would get old for some people. and all that, but he definitely had some amusing observations here and there, and some stern warnings about how society works and all that kind of stuff. Although, of course, he never really treated them as if they were stern warnings, but they sort of were. And you want to analyze their humor too. Like how do they structure jokes or use timing to their advantage? And you don't really want to rip them off. You don't want to follow their routines exactly how they did it, but there are definitely some things to observe, just like if you're studying a musical instrument or something like that. And you'll want to refine your timing too. You can pause for dramatic effect before delivering punchlines. Avoid overloading conversations. Sometimes less is more. And remember, humor is a tool for connection. So, done right, it builds relationships. Overdone, it can create distance or, outright get you into trouble. So, you want to consider all of these little details when it comes to building your craft as either a comedian or as a conversationalist. So, segment 4, practical tools for better communication. Now, here's where I'm going to get a little bit on a different trajectory. Whether you're fine tuning your sarcasm or crafting the perfect pun, communication thrives on clarity and intentionality. So, there's a little bit of a framework to keep in mind, and it's actually sort of a business concept. It's called SMART goals. So if you ever hear somebody say, set SMART goals, this is what they mean: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So what is that? What does that mean exactly? Well, here are some examples. Instead of "I want to be funnier," try "I'll write 5 witty tweets a week for a month," or 5 witty excretions if you're still on Elon Musk's little I don't know what he calls it these days. Is it even social media when it's just like it's almost like a right wing hellscape and nothing else. But anyway, um, you'll want to prioritize and delegate. Use tools like the Eisenhower matrix or Eisenhower matrix. Eisenhower. Uh, but anyway, the Eisenhower matrix to focus on what's truly important. So I'll let you look into that one. That'll be like your little homework assignment. What the hell is the Eisenhower matrix? Is that like a futuristic action sci-fi movie starring Dwight D. Eisenhower? I don't know. You're just gonna have to look into that one. But you'll want to ask yourself what worked, what didn't, and what can I adjust. Use feedback to fine tune your style. And these strategies work whether you're building humor, writing puns, or just aiming for better everyday interactions. And so that's basically the episode I've got for you. Just remember, words are powerful tools, and there's a reason that William S. Burroughs compared language to a virus from outer space, because if we're not careful, it can seem like an alien invader and a hostile force that is invading our brains like a virus that we have not really fully controlled. That's that's one of the powers and dangers of language, is that if we don't really analyze how we use words or second guess what we're saying, it's almost like the words end up controlling us, and the ideologies that we're surrounded with end up being manipulated, um, and we become the vessels for ideologies that people will cynically use to divide and conquer others. And that's part of what this podcast has been about too. So whether we're punning unintentionally or crafting the perfect sarcastic quip, how we communicate shapes our relationships. By balancing wit with empathy and intentionality, we can keep our humor sharp, our conversation engaging and our connection strong. So thanks for joining me on this episode of Critical Weight Theory, which was all about the art of connection. Oh, that sounds so nice. But if you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend or an enemy, or drop us a pun-filled review. So until next time, keep the conversation flowing and the puns rolling, intended or not.